It's midwinter. It's absolutely freezing. And heaving it down. But say my word for it, it's time to buy a BMW 650i convertible. Yeah, you know, it makes sense. May seem ridiculous. We all know that the N62 engine in the 650i is a real dud, but it's time to buy one. And I'm going to give you a few reasons why. Especially convertible this time of year, right at the start of 2022. They're worth little money, but they're climbing quite quickly. So I'm going to take you through the reasons why buying a 650i is where the clever money is, by going back to the past on a few other BMW V8 models that suffered exactly the same thing. Let's start by going back to the E32. Yeah, in 1992, the E32 had either a V12 engine, which is a fantastic M70, but it's still an old-fashioned engine, 2 distributor caps, 12 HT leads, 2 coils, 2 valves per cylinder. It was hardly up there with the high power output engines. And the other choice was the straight 6, the M30, still 2 valves per cylinder, distributor cap, HT leads and all the rest of it. Again, quite a low output for the capacity. And into that, BMW brought out their first V8 for years. But this wasn't a cast iron one, it was a fantastically lightweight V8, 8 coilover plug units, sequential injection. It was just so ahead of its time. It was a fantastic power unit. Well, it was for about 5 years, and then unfortunately what happened is the engine started losing compression, and this was all the Nikasil, which I'm sure you heard about, Nikasil fiasco, where the silicon carbide bores, which is what the Nikasil process leaves them as, wore out very quickly. And it was due to high sulfur fuels, but in main it was more due to the software that was used to run the injectors, and that allowed the cylinders to get washed down. If the car wasn't started correctly, you'd have one go, and if it didn't start, you had another go, injected more fuel into the engine, and it washed down the cylinder bores, and the sulfur turned into sulfuric acid and just melted away the silicon carbide, leaving a more or less bare aluminium bore, and so you lost compression. And it was such a big kick in the teeth of BMW, it really was. And they tried so many things, tried raising the temperature, tried altering the process slightly, couldn't be fixed. They didn't realise at the time it was due to the stupid software that put too much fuel into the engine. And so they rushed out the M62, which was a very similar V8 engine. They upped the capacity a bit, so instead of 3 litre you got 3.5, instead of 4 litre you got 4.4. The torque was much better. You could get power from 3000 RPM, whereas on the M60 it came in about 4000 RPM. It was a fantastic engine, and it went through changes as well. It was working really well in the E38 and the E31. Fantastic lightweight engine. And so they also introduced the Vanos into the E38 and the E39, which complicated things a bit, but it was still the same engine, had a really great reputation. It still had the PCV valve that popped now and again and bunged out lots of smoke, but the engineers were quite used to that with the M60, which used to do exactly the same thing. And in fact, that's how I bought my first E32. It was seen as a Nikasil failure. In fact, it was a PCV valve, and it took a couple of hours to change it. What a lovely car. Had that for absolutely years. Anyway, moving a bit further into the future, after about 8 years of running the M62, they started getting timing chain guide failures, and this was pretty catastrophic. And what was happening was that the timing chain would slap the timing chain guides, which are made out of plastic. They'd fall off and drop into the pan, and then the chain would be running on bare aluminium guides instead of the low friction plastic parts. And of course that messed up the timing of the engine, and if it was the U-shaped guide that came a cropper, then unfortunately that meant they had so much slack in the timing chain that it would, once to get out, if you rev up the engine, the timing chain would try to exit the engine through the timing chain cover, the valve covers, and I've seen so many where the oil cap is and a hole next to it where the timing chain tried to find its way out of the engine. It was absolutely catastrophic again, but unlike the E32, the E38 was well into its dotage by that point. They're getting on a bit, but it still killed the E38 and E39, anything with the M62 engine, stone dead, which included the E31, and the values dropped quite significantly for the 4.4 E31. E38s were changing hand for about 500 quid in the UK and about $1,000 in the US. They were just so much scrap metal, and everyone knew that at some point the timing chain guides were going to fail, and then it was a huge job, which meant retiming the engine, getting off the timing chain covers and the rocker covers, getting off the Jesus bolt. It's quite an involved job, especially with the Vanos on them, where it's so difficult to retime them again. Yeah, that really was the death knell for the E38, well, until people started realising that some E38s and some E31s and E39s were still going very nicely, thank you, on the same timing chain guides. And what it actually turned out to be was servicing. And we'll come on to this in a bit with the N62 in the 650i. Yeah, the problem is once the E38 had been out in the market for about 4 years, passed on to second owners, gone down the food chain a bit, the problem was they're doing little miles and being serviced so irregularly that the oils were breaking down. Now, it's fine for high mileage cars. If you're doing 30,000 miles a year, they deserve an oil change. That's generally what the thought was. Yeah, you've done a lot of work, you're going to get your oil change every year. As far as, and that sort of lines up with what BMW was recommending, even though it's long service periods. If you're doing 30,000 miles a year, you've got to service every year. Whereas if you're doing a couple of thousand miles a year in one, just using it as a pleasure car, then they didn't get their services, and they didn't, got to the end of the year, no, it doesn't need one, we've only done 3,000 miles. Then after the year two, no, it's been 5,000 miles. The BMW says it's 10 to 15,000 miles. Gets left and left, and then the volatile parts of oils start breaking down. One of them being plasticizers, which look after the timing chain guides, and the other one, more important thing, was the detergents in the oils, which kept the engine clean. You wouldn't have thought there's much use for a detergent, but just think of all those little oilways in the engine. They've got to be kept clean and free from all sorts of stuff that trundles around in the engine. And the one thing they block up quite easily is the timing chain tensioner oilways, and the varnish that it produces also locks up the tensioner itself, which is a piston inside a cylinder. And it's got a feeble little spring in it that pushes it forward to take up slack, but most of the work is done hydraulically from the engine oil pressure. Now, if the oil pressure is reduced by these blocked up oilways, you don't get any pressure onto the timing chain guides, and then the timing chain will start slapping around. And I've seen it so many times on the forums where they're saying, I'm doing the timing chain guides, and they've got the covers off, and you think, yeah, that was very likely to have needed the guides. The engine's all covered with brown varnish. You can tell straight away it's not had an oil change for years and years. And that was the secret with the E38 and E39, that if you did the oil changes regularly, once every 1 year, once every 2 years at the longest, they last forever. My E31 over there is done coming up to 180,000 miles on all the same components. I don't think even the water pump's been changed on it, certainly not the timing chain guides. So once people realised that, and the enthusiasts got hold of the car, and then they did the regular oil changes, the E38 got a much better reputation, and it's taken a while, but I've seen those values drop for the E38 to rock bottom, where they're more or less scrap cars, and then they came soaring back up again. Now you can't get an E38 for less than about 7 or 8 grand, and even then it's a tatty old one you've got to be careful of. Now the whole point of this video is about the 650i And the same is perfectly true for this BMW V8. We know all the problems that this engine had. It had leaking coolant from the coolant transfer pipe, where the front of the pipe corroded, the seal gave in, and then coolant got through behind the water pump and came out of a seat hole. And the only fix for it, as far as BMW are concerned, was to remove the engine from the car. And you can imagine how much money that was going to cost. That might have been fixed, and these days people like Arga Tools, they produce a kit where you don't have to remove the engine, but you still have to remove the manifold and a few other bits and bobs. It's still quite a difficult job. Yeah, if that was the only thing that was the problem, yeah, fair enough. You know, the N62 would have been quite happy, but no, the valve stem seals were next. And once the valve stem seals started to fail, then oil got past the seals, down the valve guides, valve stems, and then while you're driving, you're puffing out huge clouds of smoke behind you, and it's not a good look for what's meant to be a luxury car. And then add to that all the oil leaks we had with them, with the rocker covers. I mean, that was the same with the M62, but the alternator bracket was just a very strange little seal on that, and that fails, and it just pouring oil out of these engines. It was terrible. Yeah, so yeah, the N62 engine, especially in this 650i, was seen as worthless at some point. In about 2020, they'd reached the bottom of the barrel again. You could get these for £5,000, and I did a video on there. But yeah, if you want to look after your 650, by the way, I'll put all the links up so you know how to do it. You can keep these 650i's going for years and years, as long as you do the right things to it. Yes, once people have realised that, again, it's a servicing problem, not a design problem, because if the engine's serviced properly, especially happens with long mileage cars, this has got 140,000 miles on it, so it had its service every year, then you don't get problems with the valve stem seals, because the oil contains plasticizers, which we talked about, rubbicizers, and compounds that look after the seals, and that's all the seals in the engine, including the rocker cover, the valve cover seals, and the alternator bracket, and all the other ones around the car. New oil contains additives that help sort those out, and of course the detergents, which keeps the oil running throughout the engine and keeps the timing chain tensioners working properly. If the oil's changed, and the coolant, now the coolant's important on the N62 because it's corrosion that affects the front of the coolant transfer pipe. Now, BMW blue coolant has anti-corrosion properties. Now, if you'd have used BMW blue coolant right from the start, you wouldn't have had a corrosion problem, and the rubbicizers in the coolant as well would have looked after those seals, and you'd never had those problems. So say I've done 140,000 miles in this 2007 car, and the coolant transfer pipe's never been changed, nor's the valve stem seals. It doesn't smoke, it doesn't leak any coolant. It's a fantastic car to drive. And that's the reason the value for these cars is starting to ramp back up again. But more importantly than that, in 2030 in the UK, you can't buy an internal combustion engine car anymore. Now it's all going electric. Hybrids will last for another 5 years, but you won't be able to buy this car. Now, if you think about it, this is the last big V8 that BMW made. After this, smaller engine capacity, 4.4, stuck a couple of turbos on it. But there's nothing that beats 4.8 litres of normally aspirated power from these V8s. 370 horsepower versus 285 from the M62 with a capacity very similar. It's only 400cc more, 100 horsepower more. They're powerful, they're frugal, they're so visceral in their power as well, and also coupled with a 6-speed gearbox, which of course is another one which needs its oil changing regularly, and the mechatronic seals to keep them going. That's a big failure on the 6-speed boxes for all BMWs and Jaguars and a few other people. As long as the seals were changed and the oil was changed regularly, they weren't a problem. And it's the same just about for everything in this engine and gearbox. If it's serviced regularly, it lasts for yonks. But anyway, 2030, no more ICE cars. You'll not be able to buy them. And this is the last one. This is the last Dinosaur, the last big normally aspirated BMW that you'll be able to own. It's not going to happen anymore in the future. It's going to be banned, all the ICE cars. Sure, be able to hold on to the ones you got. If you haven't bought one, you're not going to get one after 2030. It's not going to happen. So yeah, this is the last of the big Dinosaur BMW V8s. All turbos and twin turbos after that. Last of its breed. Now I put up a graph of what the actual curve of the cost price of these are recently, and you'll see it had this good start, 60,000, 70,000 pounds, and it sort of went down slowly, and then it went so very quickly when the valve stem seal started being a problem and other things. And then it sort of slid along the bottom of the barrel. You could get these for £5 in the UK. And all of a sudden people said, 650i, yeah, the last of the big dinosaurs. I'd like to try one of those before we're not allowed internal combustion engine cars anymore. Yeah, and they're starting to be bought up. And instead of £5, we're seeing 15 grand and 20 grand being paid for these 650i's. Yeah, that's the whole point of this video. If you ever fancied a huge dinosaur of a BMW V8, 650i is the way to go. And the reason I mention convertibles is in the winter no one wants them and you get much better prices for them. So if you want a 650i, act now, otherwise they're going to go, or they're going to be extremely expensive, just like the E31. Can't get those for love nor money. And yeah, the 650i is going to be just the same, especially the convertible with its pillarless design, much like the E31, which was pillarless coupe. Fantastic cars. Love the 650i, and this is your last chance. Well, thank you very much for 2021 to all my members and subscribers and the people who comment. I've had a great year, thank you very much. And if you enjoyed this video, put your thumbs up. And hello to all the people who comment, thank you very much. I do just love reading the comments you put on my videos. Fantastic, very enjoyable. Even when they don't agree with me, that's fine. I quite like to argue things anyway. So yeah, put the thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching all my videos in 2021. We're in 2022 now. Hooray! Yeah, still COVID. I'll see you next time. Bye.